work? John, your hair got a little long.
Yeah, I'm working on a ponytail for Mrs. Yakimic.
Wow. Mrs. Yakimic is quite the lucky woman.
Yes, well, she's going to get another man as soon as I get that ponytail. So.
Okay.
So the
Just got
average-
dark.
Okay, you can start. I'm gonna let people in now.
All right, well, let us know when people are in.
Thanks,
Yep.
Michael.
Thank you, Michael. All right, well, we have a couple people. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lou Levy. I'm your council president. I have with me today Nick Agnoli, who is our floodplain manager and also one of the partners of Agnoli Engineering. Nick was a former engineer at the New Jersey DEP and was the chief engineer at the Meadowlands Commission. I have also Tom Little here with us. Tom is a CFN certified floodplain manager. He is with Smart Vents. His firm also handles some insurance, but Tom's got a unique knowledge of some of the things that we can do or that residents can do to help alleviate some of their flood insurance. So we're going to basically discuss 3 or 4 things here today. We are going to quickly just help everybody understand what this BFE base flood elevation is. Nick's going to do that. Nick's also going to explain the C1 waterway, what that means, where it is, who's affected. And then we're going to go into a further discussion about the things that everybody can do in town to help get their flood insurance down. And these would be things that you can bring to your flood agent, talk to them about. You can certainly talk to Tom about it. We set up a private email address for Oakland residents to get a free flood evaluation. So with that, I'd like to get started. Nick Agnoli, why don't you start us off and start going through the C1 waterway and some of the changes to the flood maps.
Sure. Lou, thank you. And thank you everyone for joining me here in my house. So I will, I'm going to talk briefly, and again, mine's going to be about 10 minutes and I'll get you to Tom Little's conversation. It's far more interesting. I'm going to go over real briefly just the changes to the flood maps and how they've affected Oakland. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about what Oakland has done through the community rating system to help reduce flood insurance premiums in town. And then lastly, I do need to touch on the changes to the stream categories in Oakland because it affects construction in or near the stream corridors within town. So with that, because I'm an engineer, I'm going to put up a PowerPoint presentation and I will keep it again. I will keep it to 10 minutes, I promise. In fact, I believe Michael from the borough has the ability to stop me if I go beyond that. So it's 12:04 now. I got a hard stop at 12:24 and I will stick to it.
Michael, if I do that, he's gone.
It's a tough crowd.
Go ahead.
Let me find share screen. Here it is. All right. Can everyone see the screen that's watching right now? Lou? Tom? Okay, great. So again, just brief discussion today about the new flood insurance rate maps and the NJDEP river classifications. Everything that I'm talking about when I get to maps will be posted on the borough website. So again, if I go too fast or I skip something, I'm going to provide both the presentation and the individual maps blown up to anyone who'd like to look at them. Well, what's changed? In 2019, FEMA made their new flood insurance studies and the new flood insurance rate maps effective on August 28th. It replaced the maps that hadn't been updated since 2005. So the maps predated a pretty massive flood control project that was completed on Pompton Dam. And as you can see, that impacted the changes to the mapping. The 2019 maps have a 27% or 28% reduction in the floodplain. And in the floodway, and the floodway is the higher velocity middle section of the river corridor. There's about an 18% reduction in that area. So,
Hey, Nick, I'm sorry. Can you just give a quick explanation about the relationship between a floodplain and a floodway?
absolutely, and I have a couple definitions coming up, but I'll talk about it a little bit now. The floodplain is the area along a stream that has a 1% chance a year or a 1 in 100 year chance of flooding. Okay, so it's the wide flood. The floodplain is the wide section around a river that could flood during a major flood event, like Irene. Irene is a great example. The floodway is your center area, the area of the high velocities that we see during a flood event that no one wants construction in, because if you build in the floodway, you're going to elevate the water surface elevation to everybody. So the floodway has the highest level of protection. The floodplain is still protected. Now, that's for construction. When we say different levels of protection, FEMA looks at both the same. So for FEMA, anything in the floodplain, the big net, anything in the floodplain requires flood insurance, as long as it's habitable. Does that help, Lou?
I think so.
Thank you, Councilman.
Continue.
So here's my change map. And if you look, you see kind of an orange-red line on the outside, and on the inside, you see a blue area. The blue area is the new floodplain. So as we saw in a prior slide, there is a pretty dramatic reduction at the southern areas of the Oakland as to who is and who is not in the floodplain. And the white and black line you see kind of outlining in between the orange and the blue, that's the DEP floodplain. So we're going to talk about it in a minute, but I want to make sure everyone understands that the floodplain by FEMA has gotten smaller down to the blue area. The blue area on its outside has another line called the flood hazard area boundary. So you have the FEMA floodplain for insurance purposes. You have the DEP floodplain for regulation of construction. So if anybody ever says to you, oh, that's the DEP floodplain versus the FEMA floodplain, that's the only difference. FEMA's floodplain is typically smaller and it's for insurance. The DEP floodplain is a bit wider because it's the 100-year plus 25%, and that's what regulates construction. So insurance, construction, two different nets. And on the southern section of the community, you saw about a 5-foot drop in your base flood elevation. So the elevation that flood insurance is determined by changed by almost 5 feet in a downward direction. And that makes the borough unique throughout New Jersey in a good way, unique in a good way. A couple terms: effective, when they say, oh, it's the effective map, the effective study. That's the map or the study that's being used to determine your zone by FEMA. The floodplain, or your zone AE, which is what it's called up here in the borough, is the area that's likely to be inundated during a 100-year or a 1% event. 1% because every year you have a 1% chance of it happening. That's about 8.5 inches of rain in 24 hours is a 100-year for Oakland, which is why Irene pretty close. The floodway is the river and its adjacent land area that has to be preserved to prevent a rise in water surface. So all your engineers, your floodplain managers, your construction code officials always want to protect the floodway, because if you build in the floodway, you start flooding other people. And the New Jersey flood hazard area, that's the line on the maps that shows what the DEP, not FEMA, but the DEP regulates, which is a 100-year event, the floodplain, plus 25%. Now, a couple frequently asked questions I get all the time as your floodplain manager: where can I enter my address and see my zone? That's on the map service center search by address page. So if you wanted to get a quick zoom into the map that's appropriate to you, and you always know it's the effective map because they keep updating it, that's where you go. But if you need a letter, or you can't find your address, or you're trying to use the map service center, you're getting frustrated, just reach out to me. You can call me or you can send me an email, and my job to the borough is I'll get you a zone determination letter, or at least point in the right direction, depending on what you want. Now, do I need flood insurance? If I'm not in the flood zone, I'm in the zone X, I'm out. The short answer is you do, because what FEMA has found is 20% of all claims are actually outside of the high-risk areas. That's because culverts can get blocked, bridges can get blocked. There could be low areas that get inundated, and your homeowner's insurance typically will not cover that. And so people have to rely on their flood insurance. And again, Tom Little's going to do a fantastic explanation when I'm done about what exactly goes into flood insurance and how to actually save a good amount of money. I'm kind of your doom and gloom boring guy, and Tom Little is your exciting, I'm going to save you money guy.
That's why I had Nick go first.
Exactly, because I put you to sleep and Tom wakes you back up.
I'm
Now,
sorry.
the borough, well, what can be done? What, other than what Tom's going to explain, what can be done to save money for the residents? Well, one of the things is the borough voluntarily joined the community rating system. And what that does, it rewards communities for doing more than you have to in their construction code office and through their floodplain management office. The borough, because of what they have done, have the borough-wide a 15% reduction each year in flood insurance premiums. So every year, every resident who's in for the most part, who's in the flood zone, should see a 15% reduction from their premium. Now, what has the borough done? Well, the borough has done an extensive job, and Michael's on the phone now, has done an amazing job of updating the website with tons of information, not your basics, but detailed information such as what we're talking about in this presentation. The borough preserves 14% of the floodplain as open space, which was rewarded by FEMA. And also, if you contact the borough, you can get your floodplain, you can get information on flood insurance, you can get advice on flood proofing. The borough provides all of that at no cost to the residents, as well as a host of other things like the construction code office and the planning board, and also your flood commission, also provide a lot of information as requested and do a lot of work voluntarily on the public outreach side. And all that has been documented and sent to FEMA for scoring, and you scored well.
Nick, might you add that what we're doing right now actually counts as community outreach?
Yes, absolutely. Meetings like this count as community outreach. And again, I thank both the mayor and the council for the chance to talk, because I love talking. But there is one more thing, and then I'll close up. I'm doing a time check. I'm good. One more thing I want to bring up, and this is very important to anyone who is looking to do construction and they are anywhere near a stream. The DEP sets stream classification statewide as part of the surface water quality standards. So in order to protect drinking water and critical habitat, that sort of thing, the DEP sets stream standards for most of the larger streams throughout the state. New categories were adopted very recently, last month. So last month, stream categories were checked and reset. Category 1 waters, one of the stream classifications, are protected from any measurable change in their water quality, and that's because those streams are considered to be of exceptional value. They're either a drinking water supply, or again, going to a parkland area, or used by a large group of people using it for recreation, or protect critical habitat for endangered or threatened species. Category 1 waters have 300-foot buffers. So 300 feet from either side of top of bank is pretty much a no-build area. It's a riparian zone that really cannot be further modified. If it's already been modified, you have some level of protection. But new modification is strictly regulated by the DEP. And why is it relevant here? It's because Oakland is almost 19% C1 buffer now. It's about 1,056 acres of buffer area. And that doesn't mean it's a taking and you can't do anything with your land, but that does mean before you do any sort of construction, you want to make sure you're not in a buffer, and you want to make sure you have the proper permits or exceptions. There are exceptions to permitting as well. Careful note, all streams have riparian zones. Category 1 streams have 300-foot riparian zones, but all streams have riparian zones. They can be as small as 50 feet, no smaller, as small as 50 feet and up to the 300-foot, depending on how they're classified, okay? Now, if you don't know, just call me, because I can look them up. It's very hard to get this information in one spot, so I'm happy to answer these questions. Now, if you have an area contributing to your stream by you, your brook, your little creek, of less than 50 acres, there is no riparian zone. So there are exceptions. So there is no riparian zone. If you have a little ditch behind your house and the only thing going to it is your backyard, it does not have a riparian zone. The area is too small. there might be other restrictions like wetlands and threatened endangered species, stuff like that. But for the most part, it will not have a riparian zone if it's that small. But everywhere else, always best to check because it's expensive to fix if you find out you did build in there and you shouldn't have. So here's a couple shots. This is the southern half of the borough. 287 is going east to west along the top. And as you look, the riparian zones, the riparian buffers do extend from the Category 1 waterways into some residential areas. These maps will be posted through Michael on the borough website, and we broke it down to quadrants to make them easier to see, but this is pretty blown up now. This is the northern half of the borough. And again, if you look to the right side of the map, you can see that the riparian zones do extend into residential areas. So it's good to check where you live and just to make sure that you're not inadvertently disturbing a Category 1 waterway, because you'll be responsible for restoring what was disturbed if there were no permits.
Excuse me, Nick, can you just go back one slide for a second?
Sure.
I think it's important that the people that live, for example, along Andrew Avenue in Chuckanut understand that now that open drainage facility behind their houses is now a C1 waterway. And therefore, those properties are now affected by the restrictions. So
you know, I'm glad you stopped me there. That was good. Yeah, if you look at Chuckanut, that was one of the ones I think both the council and I were a little surprised by, but it made sense because it's a C1 waterway.
Okay. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, that's a great question. Where can you find your category quickly? The DEP actually has a pretty good web link. You can go to what they call their GeoWeb, where if you type in your address, you can kind of zoom to your street and home address and see what's the category of the waterways near you. The borough as well will have the C1 buffer maps posted. And again, that's on me to get a 4-quadrant map over to the borough today, so it can be posted today or Monday. And I thank Michael with the borough again for doing that, because the flood page at the borough website is excellent. All right, what does all this mean? This is where I'm gonna bring it to the end. If you're waiting for Tom to talk about the good stuff, we're almost there. Give me 60 seconds. NJDEP regulates their flood hazard area. That's that black and white line I showed you. They regulate your elevation. They want to see that your first finished floor is out of the flood plain. They regulate fill of any kind. If you're doing any kind of fill, you're going to wind up needing a permit, or at least to find out that you don't need one. And any major disturbance, if you're putting in a brand new driveway, you're putting in an addition, you are knocking down the house and expanding it, whatnot, flood hazard area, you're going to need a permit or at least notification that you don't need one. The DEP also regulates their buffers, the riparian zones, and disturbance of any kind requires approval in these riparian zones. So they're not the same thing. You have the flood hazard area that regulates your elevation, and you have the buffer area that regulates the wooded area or the stream corridor area around the streams. FEMA is about insurance only. They're not controlling land use, they're not controlling construction. That falls on DEP, the construction code official, the borough engineer, and the township, the borough floodplain manager. So my recommendation, without being asked, I like to give them, if you are in or near a floodplain or within 300 feet of a stream bank, always contact the construction code official, the borough engineer, or the floodplain manager, just to verify that what you're intending to do isn't a violation of these 3 areas: the flood hazard area from DEP, the riparian zones through DEP, or FEMA's floodplain. And with that, I thank you all for your time, and I put you in the very qualified hands of Tom Little. Any questions, please reach out to me. It's good for my ego, and I enjoy them.
And you had to get the headshot in.
I tried to make it bigger, but I couldn't. Thank you all very much. I do appreciate it quite a bit.
Good job, Nick. Are you gonna just got to close down your screen? I'll make mine live right here in a minute. I certainly do not have a big headshot to show you of myself, but I am on camera, so you can see what I look like. All right, let's see here. Okay, thumbs up, gentlemen. We good? You can see my screen? Outstanding. So as we get started, just wanted to first thank Lou, Nick, for inviting me, on to share some of this information. Also, Michael, behind the scenes at the borough, for kind of bring this all together and making sure that this is the Zoom is up and running, and we're live on YouTube, I understand right now, which is just awesome. But what we're going to do today is, and by the way, I hope everybody's healthy, right, in these crazy times. Want to be full disclaimer, we're not from FEMA, our particular group. We are just here to help. We have a lot of experience with reducing flood insurance premiums, and we do that a number of ways. We've been at it for about 20 years, and we do a lot of outreach programs, much like we're doing today. And these were kind of born out of the devastating effects that we saw with Hurricane Sandy, and at the same time, some laws that were put into place that were increasing flood insurance premiums. But you'll see CFM after my name. Mr. Agnoli has the same thing. That stands for Certified Floodplain Manager. And CFM is a designation within the floodplain management community. And we're also licensed insurance agents at our particular group, the Flood Risk Evaluator. You can see on my.
Sorry, Tom, I just have to just to kind of dot the i's here and cross the t's. Tom's firm agreed to do this for us and to help us with this because they offer recommendations and things that are not necessarily dependent on anybody doing business with their firm. And just everybody needs to understand that the borough is in no way endorsing or suggesting that anyone do business with anyone. This is an opportunity to give all the residents adequate information so that they can help mitigate the flood costs, and they're bad. I mean, we all know it. When I moved here in '98, I was paying less than $1,000. My last flood insurance bill was about $8,600. So it's important that we all do this.
Excellent, Lou. And I appreciate that disclaimer. And one of the things, the guidance and the information that we're going to give you is information you can take back to your current insurance agent. We just have this knowledge. We want to give back. We want to help, truly. You'll see we put next to the email domain that Lou spoke to earlier in the seminar, Oakland@yourfloodrisk.com is an email that was set up for residents to send in questions, send in their elevation certificates, which we'll talk about, send in your flood insurance policy for a free, totally complimentary review. And we're going to respond back, whether that be via an email, we can do Zoom calls, we can have a phone conversation just to explain what's going on in your particular situation and ways you can save. So that's the ultimate goal, is to be able to help you out. We've been doing this for a number of years now with communities, not just in New Jersey, but across the country. And we have some really powerful stats that, and these are things that can lower your premium potentially today. And, we track this, and I think we're not going to go through all the details here, but the bottom line is we've done over 5,800 reviews, individual cases, and in about almost 40% of those, there are some reasonable ways to reduce your premium. Now, we define reasonable as some sort of measure, mitigation measure. Maybe it's putting flood vents in. Maybe it's just correcting a misrating on the documentation side of things. And return on investment is how we defined reasonable. And that return on investment is recouped below a year and a half. So in 40% of the cases, we're showing, whatever our recommendations are, a return on investment in less than a year and a half. And that comes from the insurance savings. So very powerful. You can see we're talking millions of dollars over the years since we've implemented this program. And, just Nick had hit on it, Lou as well, basic terms, because we throw them out there, especially in the flood community, pretty regularly. And it's always good to take a step back and go, well, what does BFE mean again? Well, that's your base flood elevation. And Nick had, I was shocked, and I wrote it down. I'm like, holy cow, BFEs are going down 5 feet with these new maps. That's incredible, considering in most cases they're going up, right? And so the base flood elevation is the calculated level that floodwaters will rise during a 1% annual chance flood event, or what they used to call the 100-year storm, right? But that's your BFE. Now, most of the communities, as Nick said, you guys are going to fall into a AE flood zone, all right? Special flood hazard areas, there's 2 different types of zones, A and V. V, you're going to see along the coast, down the shore. Those are the velocity zones. But but in the community of Oakland, you guys are going to have what's called AE zones. Water's going to, in some cases rise up slowly, not come with a lot of storm-induced wave action, right? So it rises up gradually around your house or your structure. And we'll talk about hydrostatic pressure and ways to alleviate that. But most importantly, when you have a federally backed mortgage and you fall into a special flood hazard area, an AE zone in your case, you're required to have flood insurance. And even if you're not required, and Nick made a really good point, 20% of the NFIP claims, actually they bumped it up to 25% of the NFIP claims in a given year fall into areas outside of the special flood hazard area, your X zones, right? Your shaded X zones. And in those areas, you can get flood insurance. It's called a preferred risk policy, or PRP, and it's for a couple $100. We all buy insurance in a lot of cases for our cell phone, right? We'll spend $10, $11, $12 a month insuring our phones, our smartphones. Well, for $24 a month, $25 a month, you can get flood insurance for your house if you're in certain areas, okay? And it's just a really smart investment. Now, we hit on the CRS. Kudos to Lou, Nick, the rest of the borough of Oakland for their CRS. I'm sorry, Lou?
Flood Commission, because they did a lot of work on the CRS.
Well, and the flood commissions, high fives to everybody that participates in the CRS side of things, because it's a huge undertaking, a lot of hard work, and that hard work's paying off in the tune of a 15% discount, a class 7, and that's really offsetting a lot of the insurance increases that we're experiencing right now today. So well done. If you're building new, and Nick hit on this during his part, if you're building new, obviously, we want to check the maps. We want to check any of the NJDEP requirements and so forth. And elevation's critical when you're constructing in an AE zone. So in the borough of Oakland, there's a 2-foot freeboard requirement. So you're going to go 2 foot above whatever the base flood elevation is for new construction. And that's where your lowest living floor is going to be needed to be at a bare bones minimum. Now, and again, like Nick kind of hinted at, right, there's a little bit of doom and gloom here in the beginning of this presentation. We're going to talk about the increases just so you have a sense of where they're coming from and the why. And then what we're going to do to wrap it up is show you some examples that there is relief out there. Flood insurance relief is available. We'll go through those different options. In 2012, and this was shortly after, actually it was before Hurricane Sandy hit, July of 2012, President Obama signed the Biggert Waters Reform Act in the law, okay? And that's where you started to see those annual increases start to take place. In 2014, they then passed what was, originally the Grim Waters, but they abbreviated the HFIAA, or HIFA, which stands for the Homeowners Flood Insurance Affordability Act. And a lot of people picked up on affordability. Oh my gosh, it's going to be inexpensive again. That's great. Nah, what it did is it slowed down the annual increases that Biggert Waters put into place. But you're still being phased out. And from what I understand from Lou and Nick and what they explained, a lot of pre-firm structures here in Oakland and a lot of homes without an elevation certificate. And that's going to be key. We're going to need to get ECs. But what you're seeing is if you fall into the pre-firm class, you're being phased out of a subsidized rate to what's called your actuarial risk rate. And we can't figure out what your actuarial risk rate is unless we have that elevation certificate. That's the stopwatch. That tells us when those increases will stop. So also an additional change, there's surcharges. Again, that 15% CRS discount is really offsetting those various surcharges that you're seeing. And then April 1st, really, adding salt to the wound, right? April 1st of this year, here comes some more increases. And this happens every April, right? And here we go, primary pre-firm homes. A lot of the homes that are in Oakland, 7.5% increase. So if you're renewing after April 1st through the NFIP, and you fall into the primary pre-firm category, you've never, probably had a claim or maybe just one, you're seeing a 7.5% increase. Next line item is where it gets pretty scary. SRL, non-primary, substantially improved properties, non-residential structures, or commercial buildings. If for those particular cases, you're going up 23 to 25% this year. in increases. And that's been happening over the years. And 25% is the maximum increase as per Biggert Waters and Haifa. And so now, if you fall into that category, and I understand there's a few folks, might even be on the phone, SR that are, severe repetitive loss properties, you're getting hit with that 25% increase. All right. So hopefully your ears are perking up. We're going to get into what all this means and how to save you in a second. If you're post firm and you have an elevation certificate, or you have an elevation certificate, therefore you're looking at post firm rates, then you're experiencing a 5% increase. Just as a recap, and Lou tells me you guys are pretty savvy in the community because of the outreach efforts that the team in Oakland pulls together. But just as a reminder, repetitive loss properties, or RL, these are properties that have 2 or more claims, flood insurance claims, of more than $1,000 over a 10-year period. Then we have severe repetitive loss, or SRL properties. These are properties that have experienced 4 or more claims of more than $5,000, or 2 or more claims where the total of those claims exceeds the current value, market value of that property. All right, and that's within a 10-year window on both. All right, so there's some folks that are falling into that category, and you might be going, oh my gosh, I'm going to bash my head up against the wall. There's nothing I can do. No. We're getting there right now. So clear communication is a big shift that FEMA made in January of 2017. That's what one of the laws started to enforce. Transparency. What can be done to lower flood insurance premium? And you might have received a flyer in the mail with your renewal that looked much like this. And it was a flyer. What can you do? What will your flood risk cost? And what can be done to lower your premium? And they give you 2 options, right? So option 1, kind of goofy, but they go, do nothing. All right, well, that's a stupid option, right? So let's look at option number 2. That's actually action. Get an elevation certificate. All right. Tom already mentioned EC in the beginning. We're going to hit on that now. Here's an elevation certificate. It's a form that's filled out by a professional licensed New Jersey surveyor in your case, right? And on this particular form, it's a FEMA form. And it has some basic information, property address, will be inputted in there, the building owner's name and so forth. And it's going to have some details of the structure. And say it's a residential home. Is it built on a crawl space? Does it have 1 floor or 2 floors? So all that gets documented on this form, including the map information that Nick spoke to earlier. What's the base flood elevation? In this case, it's 9 foot on the screen here. It's in an AE flood zone. And then we're going to see all of our elevations. Now, the elevations are elevations of the different floors and grade levels around your home. All right, and I'll show you some examples in a minute, but this is done by a surveyor. And this is the holy grail of information when it comes to figuring out what can you do to lower your flood insurance premium. Now, just wanted to pull up a couple of names nearby in the area. Again, no endorsement, as Lou said in the beginning of my little segment here, but it's important to get knowledgeable professionals and those resources out to the public, right? And so here we go. If you need an elevation certificate and you don't have one today, here are surveyors locally that you can contact, and they can provide you with a quote for your property to get that form done. All right, so I'll leave that up here for a second. You can jot down those phone numbers and names. And I just want to say one thing, you know, and we've heard this a lot through our involvement on the flood insurance side. A lot of folks think, oh my gosh, if I get that elevation certificate, FEMA's they're gonna raise my premium. They're gonna know like the truth, and I should not be paying whatever I'm paying right now, and it's gonna go up. That's not the case. All right, you're always gonna qualify for the lowest rate. So you get the elevation certificate, it can only help you. All right, and that's really, really, really important. It can only help you. All right, so
if I may, just 1 second. Those 3 engineering firms are 3 firms you can call. You are welcome to call anybody. You can look at, you Google up engineering or surveying companies near Oakland, call anybody. Those just happen to be 3 that we know about, you know, off the top of our heads. Go ahead, Tom. I'm sorry.
Very good point. So what does a review look like? Now, this is speaking to that email, right? Oakland@yourfloodrisk.com is where you can send your elevation certificate if you already have one. and then also your flood insurance declaration. So you have the elevation certificate, which we just reviewed on the left-hand side. On the right, this is your declaration page. It may look like this or, have different colors and so forth, but you're going to see what your coverages are. You're going to see building, contents, what your premium is. That's what we call the declaration page, or you'll hear deck page as well. These two documents allow us to do an audit on your building and your policy. If you don't have the elevation certificate, that's okay. Send in your declaration page to oakland@yourfloodrisk.com, and we'll evaluate that and provide you some guidance. And actually, I encourage you to do that before you maybe go and get an elevation certificate, because maybe we pick up on something from a mapping standpoint or how you're being rated on this that we can provide you guidance on before you spend any money. That's the key thing. We want to help you before you spend a dime. All right, so we're going to take these two documents, and this is just an example of a report, just an example of what, and there's other agents out there that can do similar reporting like you're seeing here. And this report's just going to tell you where your current premium is. In this case, this particular person was in Ship Bottom. They were paying $6,700 a year for flood insurance. And we were able to mitigate this property with flood vents or flood openings. And we reduced the premium down to $1,300 a year by a retrofit of a flood vent in the perimeter of the foundation wall. All right. So we're going to give you an example of that, but that's what you can receive from the reporting side when you're working with knowledgeable professionals that spit out a report back to you. All right. So to boil down, what are these options? And then we're going to get into our case studies. Mitigation, and that's, as an example, putting flood vents into an enclosed area that's below the base flood elevation. We're also going to look correctly rated. In many cases, just getting the elevation certificate alone can reduce your premium. And I'm going to give you an example here in a minute. But just getting the form, and they average, depending on where you're at, $500, $750, but the return on investment can be recouped instantaneously just by getting that form, no other work being done. Then there's other issues like, oh man, there was an issue with the way that the other agent was rating me, and we guide them through how to clean that up in the system. Couple clicks of a button could reduce your premium as well, just by cleaning up paperwork. And then as a third option, that might be a fit for some of the folks, private flood insurance. There are a lot of private flood carriers out on the marketplace. They are quality policies, in many cases exceeding what the NFIP provides. And that also can be a nice outlet to reduce your premium. And so those are kind of the factors that we're going to work through to identify, all right, what's the best option for this particular resident? And then we'll provide that guidance. Here's a case study. We had this, the single family home, one floor property built on a crawl space. You can kind of see there's a attached garage on the back end of it right here. And this house was built in 1952. So what we would say is, well, this is a pre-firm home. Pre-firm meaning it was built before the flood insurance rate maps were in effect in that particular area. So this is pre-firm. So they're receiving one of those subsidized rates. It's their primary residence. And bingo, the one key element here, no elevation certificate. Most pre-firm homes, unless you were very proactive, with you seeing your increases and taking the advice of maybe, what the NFIP is putting out there, maybe you got an elevation certificate, but still today, there are a lot of, and not just Jersey, but across the country, pre-firm homes that don't have an elevation certificate. And that's what was happening in this particular case. No elevation certificate. They had $250,000 in building coverage. That's the max you can get for a residential home via the NFIP. They had $25,000 in contents coverage. You can get up to $100,000. Okay, so they weren't maxing out on the contents, but they were, and this was a case study from, I think the pictures were from 2014. So 6 years ago, they were paying close to $3,000, and that was a subsidized rate. And you can see they had their construction date here as 1952, right? So pre-firm, like many of you on the call or watching via YouTube today. So what did we do? We got an elevation certificate. That's it. Surveyor went out, filled out the form. Yes, there was a cost associated with that, few $100.
Well, I think I had one done, I think it was almost $750. I've seen them at $650 and somewhere in there.
So let's use 750 just to be safe. All right, so this property owner spends $750 to get the elevation certificate. Now we can look at that and we can see what their actuarial risk rate should be. We look at the elevations, and that's where we're using those post-firm rates. We have an elevation certificate. It tells the story of what the true risk is for the property. And remember, new maps lowered the base flood elevations in the borough in a positive way, right? So now is the time to get one of those forms done. And here's the end result, right? This is what everyone's looking for. From $3,000 down to $547. Lou just said $750 was the cost of an EC. When I say instantaneous return on investment, it's right there. You're done. And that's right there is one easy step that you can take to lower that premium, is that elevation certificate. And now let's look at it over, a 30-year period, right? In this particular case, gosh, over 30 years, that's almost $73,000 in savings just by spending that $750. Now, again, if you're unsure and you're like, you know what, I don't want to spend that $750 right now until I really know if this is going to help me. That's where you can tap into Oakland at yourfloodrisk.com and get some totally free advice and guidance. And then also, Nick also made himself accessible as the borough's floodplain manager. All right, last case study. So we kind of showed you one where it didn't have an elevation certificate. Here's an elevated home as well, but it's getting rated, okay, from a lowest rated floor. It's getting rated where you see the red right now, all right? So when you're in the red, it's bad. You don't want your lowest rated floor to be a negative number. Negatives are bad, increases the premium. So in this particular case, this property owner is being rated down on this lowest floor, and it's 9 feet below the base flood elevation. That is scary from a premium standpoint. They're receiving subsidized rates right now, and their premium, as they get phased in, is going to go to $9,000 plus eventually, unless they do something. All right, and here's the base flood elevation. Remember, that's the calculated height that the flood water will rise up to during a 1% annual chance flood, or what we used to call a 100-year storm. And the first floor, I can tell you, is actually 1 foot above the BFA. So if we fixed all the issues with this home, we can get it a +1 rating. So when you're in the plus, you're saving money. Your lowest rated floor is above the floodplain mark. So how did we exempt, right? That's the insurance term, exempt that enclosed area that's below the floodplain from rating? What we did is we needed to make a flood vent retrofit happen, all right? And there are a bunch of different ways that you can provide flood openings. I'm going to just show you an example of an engineered flood vent. So this is an engineered flood vent. It's a little tough on my screen. Let me see if I can't.
You need to get rid of your virtual background, I think.
Yeah, I got that fancy virtual background. That's not. We'll get it. Hold on 1 second. We'll do that because then you guys can truly see. All right, we're gonna go plain Jane here. You can see my beautiful kids in the background now as my, that's better background anyway than what I had. All right. So what we're looking at here is an engineered flood vent. Now this one has louvers built in. So if you have a crawl space or an area that you need natural air ventilation, there's products out on the market that have these louvers built in. They open and close with temperature change. So in the wintertime, it gets cold, those louvers are going to close automatically. Spring and summer, they're going to be fully open. Now, what makes it special in an engineered vent, and there's a bunch of them out there, right? There's an internal latching system that keeps the flood door closed. It's an internal float in this particular case that latches it closed. So as water rises up, I had this set up to kind of do my own Vanna White thing here. As water rises up, what it does is it unlatches the flood door, and that door pivots open. All right, so now the door's in the open position, and we just put this 3-inch diameter sphere here to show that debris is going to be able to pass through. That's actually an engineered flood vent requirement. A 3-inch sphere needs to be able to pass through. And then the door would flip the other way and allow the flood water in. And that's a requirement for all flood openings, allow the flood water in and out. These particular vents are made in the United States, so that's pretty cool, made in America. and they're stainless steel, 316 marine grade stainless steel. That's also important because anything below the base flood elevation has to be made out of flood resistant materials, right? Pressure treated lumber, stainless steel, and so forth. So going back to the screen here, that's what this particular property owner needed to install to reduce his premium. Flood vents were the solution. It's not always the solution, but in this case it was, due to the height of his enclosure. When you get 4, 5, 6, 7 feet with what we would call full height enclosure area below the base flood elevation, flood vents can make an impact. So they put the vents in. You can see that there. We'll go to the next slide. It was a 1 CMU block needed to be removed. So it's a pretty simple retrofit. Remove that block and the vent slides in. And then the building codes, FEMA regulations, they require flood vents on 2 different walls, and the bottom of the vent needs to be within 12 inches of the highest adjacent grade below that opening. So 2 different walls within a foot, and you can kind of see in this picture that this particular owner, met all those requirements. In many cases, so this homeowner didn't have flood vents, and in other cases, we'll see this. And maybe this, you might have the situation where you're at now, and you're doing everything right. Maybe your first floor is above the BFE or at the BFE at a bare bones minimum. And you're like, well, I got openings. I have these vents in my foundation. Hey, maybe they're too high. Maybe they are listed as an unacceptable measure. FEMA has a technical bulletin that lists unacceptable flood venting measures. If the vent can be closed off, it's unacceptable. It would give you a 0 rating. So there's many factors. Maybe you do have an enclosure. There are vents, but they're not in compliance for one reason or another. So it's something to look at. Again, we can help guide you through that process with that email address, oakland@yourfloodrisk.com. Now, here's the Wagners, just as a reminder. And I say the Wagners because I'm used to doing this case study because it's such a good one. That was the last name of the Wagners, 28-year veteran of the Air Force, great people. And they were just getting really hit hard on the flood insurance side. So remember, no flood vents. They're being rated down here in the red. But we put the flood vents in. Now we get to exempt that space. What I mean by exempt, it's not vulnerable to hydrostatic pressure. And shame on me, I didn't even explain what flood vents do. They allow the flow water to flow in and out of that enclosed space. So during a flood event, you don't want the pressure building up on the wall because it can cause the wall to collapse, right? So the vents let the water in and out, equalize the pressure. And then from an insurance standpoint, we go, hey, that enclosed space is safe. You're good to go. So that's what the Wagners did. Now we're in the green.
Hey, Tom, if I might, just to put it in perspective for the residents in town. So when we had all the flooding, I guess in Hurricane Irene back in 2011, some of the houses on Roosevelt, if you took a ride down there after the flood, those homes had rather high foundation walls. And more than one house actually had the foundation wall caved in. And that was a result of at least one of them was a result of hydrostatic pressure. The water came up high, it didn't get into the foundation, so it just pushed against the wall and it cracked the wall. The flood vents allow the water to get in and create equal pressure, as Tom said.
You got it exactly. Yep. And that's I can try to pull up a visual here before we're done, but that's a great example of what flood vents would alleviate. So with this particular case, they put the vents in. Remember, their old premium were around $2,000. We reduced it down to $511. Retrofit cost them $1,200. Again, year 1 savings. So it wasn't even a year and a half. I mean, it was right there, instantaneous. So just in closing, flash up again the email that you can send your elevation certificate in if you have one, along with your flood insurance declaration page. If you don't have the EC, no problem, just send in your flood insurance declaration page info, and we can start the process of providing some guidance on what you could do and the various steps to reduce your premium.
Hey, I do have a question that I got from a resident on my phone, which I now have to go find. You continue because it's going to take me. Oh no, here it is. So Tom or what's your face, Nick? He's going to kill me. we had our house raised around 1990 on Lakeview Terrace. Nick, you know where that is, obviously. I believe an elevation certificate was completed after the raising. They'd like to know, is there any time limit on when the elevation was established? The elevation certification today should be the same as it was back in 1990, correct? And the flood levels have changed, but the sea level, well, the answer to the question about flood levels and sea levels is the base flood elevation did change. But maybe you can answer the other question, Nick or Tom?
Yeah, I mean, Tom, I can give the kind of the official answer on flood elevation certificates is if you're using them for either contesting your flood zone or presumably, and Tom will let you answer this part, presumably reducing your flood rate, the advice you're usually given by the engineer or the surveyor is you want to have the newest maps reflected on the elevation certificate. Tom?
Right.
Is that similar to what you've explained?
No, exactly. So, there's an expiration date on the elevation certificate form. Screws a lot of people up. They think, oh my gosh, the date is no longer good. I need to get a new one. No, we can still, for insurance purposes, use that EC. But to Nick's point, it might be beneficial, especially for the borough of Oakland with the BFEs going down. It might make sense to get an updated one because the elevations of the home, yes, haven't changed, but the map information has changed in a positive way in most cases from what we've seen. So getting a new elevation certificate with utilizing the new maps could prove to be very beneficial. And
Well,
Yeah,
you can do an amendment.
bounce off that for Lou. Typically, again, your mortgage company, your insurance company, et cetera, they're in the right to ask for a new elevation certificate if the maps reflected on the elevation certificate are outdated. Lou?
No, I was just going to say, Nick, you and I had also had discussions about amended elevation certificate. So, for example, this person who already has one, they certainly could get their elevation certificate amended, correct?
I strongly, Lou, yes, on that point, I appreciate where you're going with that because yes, I would reach out to the same survey firm that did it originally and ask for them to simply amend the elevation certificate, make changes to it and just sign it.
What I would add to what Nick just said is, that survey company is not going to come out. They're going to amend the elevation certificate based on the maps. So, I bought my house in Oakland in 1998. And I did have a flood elevation certificate when I bought the house. However, subsequent to that, I had flood vents put in. Now, based on the new standards, they're not adequate anymore because they're the old air vent types. But so if I had my flood elevation certificate just amended, it probably would have helped. But because I had them come out and do a new one from the ground up, the new one reflected the flood vents, which is a good thing.
Well, I'll just add to that too. If you send an elevation certificate, in for a review, and we determine that you don't have adequate flood vents, and that's the reason that you're paying a higher premium, you can retrofit the flood vents in and not get an amended elevation certificate. Any insurance agent can document that. There's a form that the agents use. You get pictures of the vents in the foundation, and you don't have to spend any extra money with getting a revised elevation certificate form. So
perfect. So if you guys are done, I'd like to open this to the public. If anybody has any questions, wants to ask us any, I know we answered a few things on the chat. Michael, I guess you're going to moderate that.
Yes. First up, I'll unmute Joe. Her name is Joe.
Hi, Joe.
Or her or him. One sec.
And I apologize if it looks like I'm not looking at the camera. I've got a bigger screen in my office and I'm old, so it's much easier to see things. Nick, don't say a word.
Hi.
Hi, Joe.
I put my question in the chat, but I'll say it again. Like a couple of years ago, we got a letter from the insurance company to get us an elevation certificate. I did that. I think we're like 1 inch below where we're supposed to be. My house was raised in the 70s, long before I ever moved in. I've never, ever had water inside the living space. I live on River Road on the riverside. And And yet my insurance every year is going up ridiculous amounts of money. And I've never gotten more than $2,000 on a claim. And that's simply to clean out and sanitize the basement. Like there's no structural damage. They're not paying for, you know, furniture and any of that stuff. It's like, I don't understand why it's so expensive when I've never ever had water in my house.
Hey, Joe.
This is actually really common discussion. So Tom, this is definitely right in your court.
Yeah, no, I was going to ask you, Joe, when did you get the elevation certificate done?
2017.
I'm sorry, I missed the first part.
2017.
2017. Are you sure your current insurance agent has the elevation certificate in hand and they are rating you off of the elevation certificate?
Yes.
Okay. Second question, what are you paying in premium?
It's several $1,000s. I don't know the exact figure off the top of my head, but it's a lot. And so this year I lowered it so that my deductible is $5,000 instead of $1,000.
So you raised that deductible to lower that premium down. Okay. And what the
I think, Tom, we should probably also see if because the maps changed in
Oh, I was
2019.
gonna say, Joe, what street do you live on?
River Road.
So you actually need an amended elevation certificate. River Road,
Yeah.
the elevations, the base flood elevation is dropped. You may very much benefit from a flood elevation certificate.
Well, I think Joe's she has a perfect case. What we would end up doing with something like that is we'll do the zone determination, find the new, BFE for that particular site, and we can actually run the premium based off of the new maps without having anything done with an elevation certificate.
Beautiful. Does that help you out, Joe?
Yes, thank you.
All right, and just the other thing to understand about paying insurance rates, the flood risk, as they call it, is really a byproduct of the elevation of your property. Whether your property is actually flooded or not is somewhat irrelevant, other than if it becomes a severe repetitive loss or repetitive loss property.
Well,
So
I
my
understand that. I mean, my
personal
neighbors around me for years, their houses have been filled 2 to 3 feet with water during Irene and Floyd and, other major events, but I've never had.
Let's not
water.
forget 2009. We all had fun that year.
That was Irene, right?
No, 2009 was the year that the Army Corps project flooded us about 2 times, once in April and once in October.
Yeah, a couple key
Right.
dates to kind of remember is in 1999 there was Floyd, which at the time was one of the biggest ever. 2009 there was backup from the Army Corps project on the river, and then in 2011 Irene is generally recognized in many parts of New Jersey as the 100-year event. So I think
Right, but that was caused by a dam break up in New York.
Well, you know what? That's a funny thing you mentioned that. I thought the same thing. I think, Nick, you and I were just discussing it about a week or two ago. So there was a dam on Harriman property, actually at the Harriman estate, and that dam blew out during Irene. And I think the number was what, 10 million or 100 million gallons dumped out of it?
I believe it was 100 million, but again, I caution everyone on this call, compared to the flows during Irene, it was, by the time it got to, Oakland and farther south, it was a very small amount of water by the time it got to us. So there was a dam
Came up
break.
very quickly.
No, but there was a dam break, but it was extremely far upstream from here. And impacts below like the thruway were pretty minor. And I'm talking in upstate New York. So you have to imagine it traveling. It'd be like, it'd be very much like us saying the failure of Lake Apacon flooded me. It could eventually get here, but it's going to take a while and it's not much is going to be left.
Well, in actuality, normally in a rain event like that, it takes several hours or a full day for the water to come up that high. That came up in like an hour.
It increased the rate of rise. Absolutely.
I will tell you, Nick, I was chairman of the flood commission back then. And we had actually gotten a phone call from the Mahwah Police Department, and they had gotten notified about the dam blowing out. And literally 45 minutes later, the surge came down.
Wow.
It
You know,
moved.
no, again, I'm not saying there wasn't a lot of water and there was a rapid rise, but I'm saying the extensive flooding, for
Right.
the most part, of the
Agreed.
fact that Irene was massive.
It was bad. Joe, does that help you out?
Yes, it does. It's very good information. Thank you very much. This
All
is
right.
very informative.
Yeah, Joe.
Thank you, Joe. Michael?
I think someone named Sean Wallace had a question, so I'll unmute him.
Thank you.
Hey guys, I just wanted to know what the BFE change was for like the Riverside area, Riverside Drive and Colony.
Sean, if you email me directly, I can give you exact BFE changes for specific properties. That's not a problem at all.
Okay, thank you.
No problem at all. They have dropped for the most part in that area, though.
Nick, does he have your email address?
It's in the PowerPoint. It was on the slide, but if anybody here needs to know it, it's just my last name, which is on the back wall, Agnoli, at agnoligroup.com.
I'm sorry, what's your name again?
Look behind me, Lou.
I'll
Look
just
behind me.
I'll just say too, if those questions do roll into Oakland at yourfloodrisk.com, we can do the same thing. Look at the historical map
Perfect.
and then tell you.
Oh,
what-
thank you, Tom.
So
Thank you.
we have that special talent as well as Nick. So
You probably do it better, so I probably defer to you.
Nick, maybe you could just because it's really important, especially if somebody qualifies for what we would call grandfathering, right? And rating them off of the previous map. So the new maps came out in 2019. What was the date of the old map?
2005.
Now, was there one previous to that?
Yep, there's also, in fact, I have the whole list here. Give me 1 second.
Wasn't that other one from way back when?
I believe it was 85, but let me I had it up. I'll pull it back up. I had them all.
I think it was 84, 85.
And I bring that up because in a lot of cases, if we can show that the structure was built in compliance, they never had an elevation certificate, but we have the year it was built, say 1986, if the first ever map was 85, that could be also a step to reduce their premium, is the grandfathering to those older maps.
All right, I have the dates here. It was wow. It was 2005 or the prior September 30th. Before that, there were some other map changes in 1995, also in September, and before that, there were maps in 1984.
Okay.
And 85. It was both 84 and 85. So they're pretty much following what is supposed to be a 10-year cycle. They're sticking to it pretty well. The new ones were delayed. The Bergen County maps were delayed, which is why there's a longer lag from 2005 because of all the map appeals.
Sean, does that help you?
Yep, that's all good. Thanks, guys.
Perfect. Thank you, Sean. Michael, next contestant.
If anyone else has a question, there's a raise your hand feature next to your name. Just click on that so I can unmute you.
Well, I guess we're good.
Yeah, I don't see anyone else.
See a hand. I'd like to just ask a question.
Sure.
Okay, sorry. Christine Gunset, 14 River Road. I actually live a couple of houses down from Joe. Is there a certain number on our certificate that we should be looking for? Or is that all different based on where you live? Like above level, like what's a good number if you have a certificate and you want to glance at it?
Right. So if you, Nick, give me what's the average base flood elevation?
Okay. Hold on. Let me pull it up.
Oh, Rich, it's Island. I think that's Island Terrace. It's right up, just on the other side of the bridge from my house.
What is it, Lou? What's the number?
It's anywhere near you, Lou. It's between, like, what are good numbers between in the 204 to 205 range.
All right, so let's just use that as an example. Let's just say 204. All right, so what you're going to do when you have an elevation certificate in section B9. All right, I'll share my screen here again. So let's do this. Okay, so when you're looking at the elevation certificate, B9's over here on the right-hand side. Okay, that's your base flood elevation. So that would say 204. Then we're going to look down here in the section C area. These are the elevations of your home. So your C2A, which is the top of the bottom floor, that could be, you know, a walkout basement type setup. It could be a crawl space. That number, they're measuring from the top of that floor. If that's at, say, I don't know, I'm just going to say 200, right? So it's 4 foot below 204 minus the 200, 4 foot below the BFE. You might still be okay. Don't freak out with that. The most important number becomes B, the top of the next higher floor. That's supposed to be your first living floor, right? And say that number, and I know it doesn't say it on this, it's just an example. Say that number's 205, right? So the BFE's at 204, your first living floor's at 205. So you're 1 foot, technically, with your first living floor, 1 foot above the base flood elevation. That would be good. You either want to be 0 at a bare bones minimum, or then have a +1, 2, 3, or even 4, you know, +4, you're maxing out with insurance discount. What you have to be scared of is when, gosh, that number, if your base flood elevation is 204, and that number, your first living floor's at, say, 200, now your first living floor is below by 4 foot, and that's where you would still experience those higher premiums. But fear not, because maybe you qualify for private flood insurance, who might say, you know what, you know, we're going to take on your risk and we're going to provide you a really reasonable premium because our models show that, you know, you shouldn't be paying $4,000. So there are different ways if you do fall that far below the base flood elevation. But it's your first living floor, and you're looking at B9, that's your base flood elevation, and then these two numbers, A and B, they're pretty big drivers.
That's C, A, and B.
Correct. So you're, yep, B9 for the base flood elevation, and then C2, which is section C, it's all your elevation, and then yes, letters A and B.
Okay, so reaching out to you, sending you the deck page and the elevation certificate, which I have. It might be a couple years old, but my house didn't, you know, change, just the maps changed. Would never hurt, correct? To send it to you so you can look at it.
Oh, absolutely not. No, we're just going to provide you some just guidance and what our eyeballs are seeing through our evaluation.
All right, so I'm definitely sending this to you guys. I will send an email, and I can't tell you how much we, you know, people who need flood insurance appreciate this information and all the work that Oakland did. I know Gina Steele, I'm sure you know that name. Gina Steele, I think you know that name, would tell me some information, and you know, you guys did a lot of work, so I appreciate that.
It was our pleasure.
Oh, thank you for the opportunity.
Michael? Any other contestants?
If anyone else has a question, feel free to unmute yourself.
All right, well, guys, I really appreciate everything. I hope, you know, anybody who watches this, certainly, you know, avail yourself of the Oakland at yourfloodrisk.com, because Tom can help. And if you guys have any questions about doing construction, whatnot, you know, certainly contact our construction office or contact our floodplain manager, Nick Agnoli. And gentlemen, I really appreciate you guys taking the time to put your PowerPoints together. And the residents of Oakland appreciate it. Thank you so much. Michael, that's a wrap.
Thank you.
Oh, yes.
One more. Just you were mentioning the base flood elevation. Are those numbers, do they stay the same or do they change because of the new maps?
Well, that's what the new maps did. They changed the base flood elevations.
So what are they now? 204, 205? Because
Roughly. I'm up on the end of Lakeview Terrace. I believe by my house, it dropped, oh God, was it